Welcome to Intangibles podcast. I'm Steve BERG, your host. Success is driven by how as much as by what. How we communicate, how we lead, how we relate to our environment are all vitally important. Intangibles is a podcast that explores the underlying traits, qualities, and behaviors that improve the how. This is accomplished by finding the people who have studied and been successful practicing these soft skills and having informed conversations with them to get to what is learnable. Let's begin. If you search for tenderness, it isn't hard to find. You can have the love you need to live. But if you look for truthfulness, you might just as well be blind. It always seems to be so hard to give. Honesty is such a lonely word. Everyone is so untrue. Honesty is hardly ever heard and mostly what I need from you. That, of course, is Billy Joel. His point, I believe, is universally understood. Honesty is hard, and most people don't do as good a job of it as they should. It is a subject that people shy away from because it takes real commitment. Today, I want to take a closer look at honesty because it has a real payoff. Joining me in conversation is Ron Carucci. Ron is the best-selling author of 9 books, including To Be Honest, which we'll be referencing today. Ron is the co-founder and managing partner of Navalent, a consultancy that works with CEOs and executives pursuing transformational change in their organization. Ron is a regular contributor to the Harvard Business Review and Forbes. His work has been featured in Fortune, CEO Magazine, Inc., Business Insider, MSNBC, Business Week, and Smart Business. He's a 2-time TEDx speaker. Welcome, Ron. Great to talk to you.
Steve, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
So why don't we start by having you fill in any blanks about your background that I may have neglected?
Gosh, you were pretty thorough in there, Steve. I'm a father of 2 grown children who are also dear friends of mine, and I'm married to a wonderful wife, and we live in, just moved back from the West Coast to the East Coast, which actually should require a passport. The cultures are so different. When I'm not working with clients at my firm Navalent, or when I'm not writing, I'm on a biking, or I'm playing tennis, or I'm hopefully trying to just chill out and relax, but that's not always my easiest game.
You don't seem like a chill out and relax type of guy. Anybody who's written 9 books doesn't chill out and relax.
It's either my hidden sadomasochism or my glutton for punishment. I don't know what it is.
All right, let's dive into this thing. All right, let's start out by defining honesty, at least in your view, and we're gonna talk about the components that make up honesty, if that's okay with you.
So, just as a little bit of background, the book came as a result of a 15-year longitudinal study with more than 3,200 leaders that I interviewed. And we used some really cool, sophisticated AI technology to examine the data and quantify. My goal was to see, could we predict under what conditions people would tell the truth and behave fairly? And under what conditions would they lie and be self-interested? And if we could predict those conditions, then could we, shape them in organizations, or could we avoid the ones that cause us to go to the dark side? And so what we found, both in the data we examined in our own research and also neuroscientifically in our brains, truth-telling is closely associated with justice, or behaving fairly and treating others well, and purpose, working with a sense of meaning. So honesty in the book is defined as truth, justice, and purpose. It's no longer enough to just not lie. To be labeled as honest, you have to say the right thing, do the right thing, and say and do the right thing for the right reason. Truth, justice, and purpose. So when we talk about honesty in the book, we're talking about all 3.
So purpose is what you stand for, right?
It's what you live for. It's what you strive for. It's what you want your life to embody. It's the impact and fingerprint you want to leave on the world. It's what you get you out of bed in the morning, excited to be out of bed.
The reason I ask is it seems like it's not all that easy, actually, unless you spend a little time thinking about it, to know what one's higher purpose is, what one stands for. And it's a big question. How would you recommend that we determine or decide kind of what our purpose is?
I literally just shot this video 4 minutes ago, so I've got a great answer. It's a lifelong pursuit, right? The old adage, it's often misattributed to Mark Twain, says the 2 most important days in our life are the day we're born and the day we find out why. He actually didn't say it, but it's still a good adage. The reality is we spend our whole life looking for that why. It's a journey. It's not a destination. But you can get some great clues. If you think about, if I asked you to think over the last year of your life about 4 or 5 of your record-setting moments, the moments where you're at your most joyful, the moments where you're at your best, the moment where you felt like that's the moment I want to, it's like oxygen for me. Where are the places where you knew you made a difference, where you couldn't get enough of what you'd done, and who you're serving? Because it clearly would probably not have been your own interests. It would have been others. If you can look back and see the patterns of those clues, that will give you a sense for what makes your heart beat faster, what brings you to life. That will give you a sense for what purpose you were born to live. The question is, how much does your structures of your life, your career, your job, your family, allow you to have as many of those moments as possible? You may have, in fact, constructed a life that actually discourages those moments from happening, and then you're going to live in a lot of tension and stress.
Yeah, I mean, as you were answering that question, I was thinking to myself, sometimes those things happen to you and you're grateful, but that's not necessarily the things that you would pursue to ultimately make you happy. So it's hard. So when I read the book, there was something that resonated with me, tangential to this. Can you give us color on the West Point honesty checklist?
So I got the incredible privilege of, so to be honest, it's a book of heroes. I didn't want to write the villain stories. I didn't want to write about Theranos and Wells Fargo. I wanted to write about the people we'd love to emulate, the people we'd love to follow. And so I got the incredible privilege of curating the stories and the wisdom of dozens of heroes. One of them was Bernard Banks. He's a brigadier general, and he ran the leadership development program at West Point before becoming a professor at Northwestern University. And the honor code, every cadet is taught, you will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. It's blanketed. And what I was talking to Bernie about was, can honesty be taught? Can it be learned? And he said, you have to teach it. People don't come predisposed naturally to do it. And there are 3 sub-questions every cadet has to ask themselves below that tenet of, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, or tolerate those who do. One is, does this action attempt to deceive anyone or allow anyone to be deceived? Does this action allow a gain or advance to which this person is not entitled? Would I be satisfied by this action if I were on the receiving end of it? And if you can get past, the one that I always love to ask is, would you tell your mother? Mm-hmm. Because if you struggle, if you hesitate for even a minute in the answer to those questions, that's your barometer telling you, watch out here. And I think we all have, the great news we found out in the brain science, Steve, is that our natural predisposition is for honesty. Our brains are wired to thrive in honesty. But what we also know about our brains is that if you put us into conditions where the environment around us does not support that, we will succumb. And unfortunately, unlike our electronic devices that have a restore factory settings button on them, our brains don't. And so we have slippery slopes. We don't have slippery ascents.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at that and I just went, oh, that's the golden rule with granularity. I was like, I appreciate that granularity, right? Because you can get to, there's a, yes, honesty is black and white, but there's, in that opening quote, there's degrees of sincerity, right? And that allows you to really kind of get to the degree of sincerity that makes it.
Yeah, I'm often baffled when people, people now presume that I've reported myself as self-proclaimed expert in honesty. I'm not. I'm certainly not a model of it either. But I'm often puzzled when people ask me things like, well, what about, giving somebody really blunt feedback that could hurt their feelings? Or, when you get asked that, is this just make me look fat question? Or the question that says, isn't it better to withhold some information if it's going to break somebody's heart? And are those examples of honesty or dishonesty? Well, those are distinctions without differences. The reality is honesty should never be cruel. Sometimes the truth does hurt. It doesn't have to be mean, right? You can still, if the truth has to pinch, it means you probably avoided it for a long time, but it can also be told with compassion and empathy and care.
I'll tease some of those things out of you, I think, in a little while. I know those have struck me too. I don't get me wrong. I wanted to ask you those types of questions
you should,
as well.
But I think it's always nuanced.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. So And what other questions should we ask ourselves, back to the sincerity thing, to gauge our sincerity of our own honesty, right? How do you know that you're kind of beyond reproach when it comes to
Well, I
this?
think the first question you have to ask yourself is, are my actions and words matching? You know,
Yeah.
we all proclaim, whether we do it verbally or not, a set of values, right? You may say you value compassion, but if the first question that you ask after your car's been hit is how much damage was there, your actions and words didn't match. And so you have to ask yourself, how have others decoded my values? What have I shown to others that are the principles I live by? And are they ones that I actually intend to proclaim? And if they are my actions aligned to those? If my child were to follow me, or if somebody were to follow me around with a video camera all day long, in a normal course of my day, would I be proud to show that video to my children to train them? So are you who you say you are? How transparent are you with information? How much do you couch? How much do you position? How much do you withhold? How much do you spin? How straightforward are you? How much do you self-silence in the name of political safety? How you show up to other people in everyday situations, and how are you calculating power differentials? How are you calculating wins and losses? And if your sense of honesty, truth, justice, purpose fluctuates greatly, you should be worried, because that's telling you that you're at risk of compromise.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, honesty requires consistency, right? You can't be honest part of the time and not honest part of the time and still say you're honest. You're not.
Right. Interestingly enough, University of Massachusetts data would suggest, and plenty of studies correlate this, corroborate this, that we all lie on average twice a day, at least. So my question isn't, do you lie? That's a silly question. My question to people is, why do you lie? What brings you to your dishonesty? If I were to ask you to examine the last 15 choices you made that were less than honest, meaning you mistreated somebody poorly or disrespectfully, you were unwelcoming, you embellished information or accomplishments, you spun something, whatever it was, I'm guaranteeing you that if you were to examine closely and honestly those 15 most recent choices, you will see a pattern. Your dishonesty is not random. There are certain conditions, certain people, certain things that bring you to your version of dishonesty. If you want to change it, you have to find out what those are.
I know you're going to discuss some generalities with me that you can then find specifics within those generalities. I want to do that. I want to do that also. There's just so much here.
Yeah.
So is honesty, if consistency is will, is honesty a matter of will? Because it seems like it should be to me. Is it a capability? And I know it requires work every day, but isn't it as simple as just deciding to be honest and then being honest?
Oh, Steve, was that easy? I think there are certainly a group of sociopaths who wake up every day intentionally deceitful. I think most of us are more self-deceived while thinking that we're being honest. I don't think most people set out to intentionally be dishonest. I just think in the moment of truth, when it arrives, the moment is too painful to face the truth. So it is a capability that needs to be. It's a muscle. It's like going to the gym. You have to work at it and practice. You're not going to go to the gym for the first time in 5 years and bench press 300 pounds, right?
Right.
And so waiting for the moment to tell a hard truth as your first act of honesty, if you've accumulated a bunch of little dishonest, what you thought were inconsequential moments, probably not preparing you well for that moment.
Yeah. So I was paying attention again, that West Point thing really struck a chord with me. And he talks about time under code. And what he means is the more time a person spends being honorable, the more likely it is that their behavior can be sustained. So you kind of got to get like up the curve. And once you're up the curve, then you've got a reasonable time under code. The consistency becomes more natural.
Yep. Now, he also asterisks it and says, and the social research bears this out, if you leave that environment where everybody's under the code and go someplace where that is, the norms contradict that, if you stay too long, eventually you will succumb, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You'll
Yeah.
justify it with, and I think the entrance to every slippery slope has the words paved on it. Well, at least I'm not as bad as.
Right. Right. Yeah. Relative expectations killed the cat. So I was talking, it was quite some time ago actually now, to Angela Duckworth. And she told me about her running. She's like, I was running every day. I wasn't getting any better. So I went and I talked to an expert and he said, all right, great. What's your plan? What are you measuring? What's your goal? And she went, oh, and then she realized in that moment why she wasn't getting any better. Right. So I'm kind of like, with that in mind, what should be the goal and what should we try to measure when we make a commitment to being honest?
The first thing I would measure, and it's intangible, it's somewhat intangible, but is moments of joy, moments of self satisfaction, moments of peace, moments of impact. Will if you could listen to them, people are telling stories about their experience of you as their colleague or leader at home at night. My goal would be to make sure that I tell as many stories as possible about your integrity, about the example you set. And if you don't know the stories they're telling, then you should be worried.
Yeah. I mean, the big picture is to live for the big goal, I guess, is to live a life worth emulating, right? Or worth talking about.
Well, and I put my asterisk there, Steve, and say, yes, but you should still be honest if nobody's watching, right? Even if people couldn't see you, for the sake of your own soul, for the sake of your own well-being, don't live below your design constraints, right? You're designed for honesty. Live up to that constraint.
Right, right, right. Okay, so you told me about the Venn diagram of honesty, which are purpose, justice, and truth, right? And they all intersect. Um, what are the specific initial steps that an individual, I've been really focusing this on the individual. I know you've done work on both the individual and the organization. But if I'm looking at an individual, what is the individual? Because I'm assuming that, it's not organizations per se listening. What do they need to do in order to kind of establish the basis for being honest?
Well, I think certainly the ultimate outcome is trustworthiness, right? It's that ultimately people will come to rely on you and see you, use your word, consistent and predictable. I think, the question to ask yourself about justice is, how am I treating people who are different than me? How welcoming am I to points of view that I don't agree with? How do I show up around? How inhospitable am I to people that I find to be annoying? Because your measure of justice isn't just how you treat people who are like you. Your measure of justice is treating people even who don't think or believe the way you do. How often do you actually pursue learning about the differences of others, and being respectful and hospitable, even if you don't change your mind? How often do you other somebody versus welcome them?
Right.
And if those camps are pretty clear, that's telling you that your justice barometer is way too flexible.
I was talking to someone today and she totally caught me off guard. She said, oh, I know this person. He's my work accountability partner. And I was like, a work accountability partner? That's pretty amazing. And she, went on to describe that it's not like, hey, look, I said I would do this. And it's not that much of a forthright thing, but but the accountability part was the thing. Right. And I kind of think about that as well. Right. I mean, there's within our little firm, we think there's one person that has a very strong moral compass. Not that we're not moral ourselves, but it's clear. But we talk, and I think that in talking about, how does that feel to you? Does that seem right? That accountability seems like a significant thing as well.
And again, caveated with it has to include justice and dignity. Too often our accountability processes are demeaning and demoralizing, and they're shame based and they're scorekeeping based, and they're not dignifying. So I think accountability has to be dignifying. It has to be the yardsticks that we hold up to others, and also the yardsticks we hold up to ourselves have to have a measure of truthfulness to them. So we can't,
right,
not to soften the blow when we fall short, but they also have to have a degree of dignity and compassion and empathy in them.
Yeah. And you were talking about say do before, right? Like what you say and what you do.
Yep.
I recall reading that you want that you want that to be as close to 1-to-1 or 100% as you possibly can get.
I think we often confuse our say-do ratio with our say-think ratio. Meaning, I want credit for my good intentions. I gave feedback to a client that I collected from interviews with his team and said, your team finds you intimidating. And he got really defensive. He said, I work hard to appreciate them. I listen to their ideas. I give them resources. What about me is intimidating? I said, well, apparently in some meetings where you lose your patience, you become sarcastic or you become a little bit curt, or you sort of cut people off when they've gone on too long. He goes, well, we all have bad days, but it doesn't make me intimidating. I said, it's not yours to decide.
Yeah.
No one's saying you intended to be intimidating. That's the affect you have, whether you intend for it to be or not. So if you want to be not perceived as intimidating, change those behaviors. It's okay for you to feel impatient. It's okay for you to not like somebody's work. It's not okay for you to encode that discontent in those behaviors if you want people to see you as trustworthy, because intimidation reduces trust.
Right. I mean, to me, the point that you're making about whose eyes, right? Through your own eyes, hey, I'm a perfectly normal person. I'm a perfectly honest person. Through the eyes of others is what really, ultimately matters.
And we have to accept that we don't control those evaluations, but we do control the leading indicators that lead to them. We just have to recognize and begin to learn to sort of have a third eye and view how others experience us through their eye, and not conclude that, well, they're misinterpreting me. Well, don't be misinterpretable, and they won't misinterpret you.
Yes. So yes, self-awareness is part of it, but it's not all of it even. So I think what you're saying, to me, that's a really important point. So transparency, we're discussing that briefly. Just some quick things off the top of your head about kind of foundational behaviors for transparency.
I think self-disclosure is important. You don't want people guessing about what you believe or think. Even the littlest things like talking about your family or talking about a personal struggle, or making yourself human, making yourself accessible to people. Don't make people wonder, what are you thinking? Or what does he really feel? Make sure people don't have to decode you and then do it wrong. Be open, be vulnerable, be candid. Let people have a glimpse into how you think so that they can actually eventually decode it without having to ask. Give people a sense of a sixth sense of you. That will put them at ease, and that will actually raise your trustworthiness in their eye.
And by the way, if you are truly honest, you won't really have a big problem with that. If you're not truly honest, that might be difficult for you.
It will certainly be difficult for you, but even honest people who are introverted or shy or socially anxious may not realize the degree to which they come across as closed, or unapproachable or distant. And so you can be honest and cold. It's just not going to help people see you as trustworthy. And so you have to warm the room a bit, especially if there's a differential in power or a differential in rank. And so, treat people as if they are guests in your home. No matter what you're doing. I tell people, when you go on job interviews, treat your interviewer as if they've just arrived for cocktails at your home. And just, when you've been to somebody's home and they're an incredibly gracious host and everybody in the room feels like they're the only person there and feels special. Make people feel like that around you, because then they'll feel like they belong. And when they feel like they belong, they will far more likely to trust you and trust your motives. If you come across as cold and distant, then they have to wonder why.
Right. By the way, that is not easy, or at least for some. So, all right, so we've talked a little bit about honesty, and you hinted at this. Let's talk a little bit about dishonesty. What is it that erodes or corrupts honesty?
Well, I think it's other than if you're psychologically a damaged human being, for the most part, it's usually gradual. And I think, being around conditions, if you feel wronged, right? So for many people, if you feel slighted, if you feel excluded, if you feel unfairly treated, if you feel like you didn't get an opportunity someone else got that you deserved, any of those moments, and they happen every day in organizations, when people feel wrong, they feel entitled to take. right? So once they feel like you owe me, I'm going to get my pound of flesh, they're
Yeah.
on the slippery slope. They justified it, but the reality is the minute they're going to make you pay for their pain that you may have caused them, we're now slipping toward a dark place.
What about the everybody's doing it?
Yep, common reasoning. I mean, that's Wells Fargo, right? 5,000 people didn't wake up at Wells Fargo all on the same day and say, "Hey, here's an idea," But all of a sudden, everybody's getting their sales numbers met or exceeded because they're opening up these fake accounts. I'm like, well, nobody's saying anything, so I guess it's okay to do it. There was no training manual that said, "Here's how you open up a fake account." It just became practice because it became widespread, and nobody stopped it.
Yeah. And by the way, there's probably very few. I mean, there will be ultimately some holdouts that are just like, look, I can't do that. But most people won't. Most people will, the dishonesty will wear down their earnestness.
And the unfortunate thing is, especially if there's coercion, if there's peer pressure to conform. But the reality is, most people don't. If they would just listen to their gut, there's always a barometer. There's always a little, alarm system that goes off that says, "Don't do this. Really, don't do this." And if people would just trust and listen to that moment, and not fear the isolation or the estrangement or the rejection they presume will be there, if they do so, they will be so much more true to themselves. But you can't be true to yourself if you're not going to be true about yourself. And that moment becomes the first step. And then once you've moved the line, Dan Ariely calls it the "what the hell" effect, right? It's the, well, I've done this so far, what the hell, I might as well keep going.
Yeah. There's a little water in the tub, might as well put a little more in.
What's the harm now? Or you tell yourself, no one's getting hurt from this. I mean, this is a faceless crime. There's not anybody being hurt by this. What's the harm?
Yeah. So we're talking about deception and lies. And I know that there's generally reasons that people lie, and there's specifically reasons that people lie. Should we work our way up or work our way down?
You pick.
All right. So let's talk about generally what's the emotions that cause people to lie.
Usually the first one is fear, right? It's almost always a self-protective choice. Right. And so I'm fearful of some consequence of a loss of face, or a loss of relationship, or a loss of status, or a judgment. Right. So there's some avoidant consequence that I fear, that I believe, although you're almost always wrong, but you believe that this twist of the truth, or this subtle embellishment of data, or this omission of an important fact will somehow get me that outcome and protect me.
Yeah.
What most people don't ever go back and do is their postmortem on that. Did it actually work?
Yeah.
It's so funny, Steve. Whenever I speak to audiences, I always ask them, how many of you feel like you have phenomenal BS barometers? Like, you just know the minute someone is blowing smoke at you, 3/4 of the room's hands go up, right? But then I ask, so how come you don't think everybody else's BS barometers are working as well when you're doing it? Because when we're blowing the smoke, we're so convinced others are convinced. And maybe they're nodding their heads. And sometimes some people may, in fact, believe you. But over time, you're unlikely to sustain that confidence, because at some point, someone's going to go, "Wait a minute here. Something's a little fishy here."
Yeah.
So whatever, again, like I said before, what I want people to do is ask themselves, what brings you to your dishonesty? What brings you to the moment where you decided, this is the only choice I have? And what need do you believe you're serving? What outcome do you believe you're achieving by doing so? And ask yourself, honestly, is that really what's happening?
Right. So fear is one. I would assume that pride is one.
Pride, I don't want to lose face. Obligation, guilt. There's always some deterrent. It's always, typically, it boils down to avoidance, right? I'm trying to sidestep a consequence I don't want to experience. Shame's a huge one.
And probably, hey, this person lied to me, I'm lying to them. Reciprocity.
Yeah, or vengeance, right? It's I can't trust you, so I can't trust you with the truth, right? Versus saying, hey, I'm having a hard time grappling with what you told me yesterday. Can we go over it again? Just calling the question.
I mean, I think the reason why it's so good to go over the general ideas is because you can see what motivations in people might be. And you could see how in that you could fall into a trap. And if you're aware enough to say, oh my gosh, this pride or this guilt or this fear is the thing that's driving this, I need to step back, right? Then you can find little triggers or little switches to stop you from doing something that you.
The key, Steve, is to be reflective, is to go back. Like I said, it's a great exercise. I've had groups do this. Go back and privately, so I'm not going to put this on the internet anywhere, but privately examine. Think about the last 3 or 4 days in moments where you were not honest. Whether it was how you treated somebody or information you did or didn't share, or some value you compromised. And look for the pattern. Was it always around your boss? Was it always around your spouse? Was it always around some moment of consequence where you felt like you would lose something? Where it was, where your will or your desired outcome was being contested.
Right. So yeah. So I think you're kind of you're dragging us or pulling us purposely towards some of the specific reasons, right? Hey, I lied because I thought you might be disappointed. Okay.
And if disappointing people or losing esteem in their eye or not pleasing people is a real driver for you, you have to go back and examine that need. Examine how you learned that pleasing people at all costs was good. Because until you're honest about where you learned that narrative, you can't rescript the narrative to something else. Like pleasing people with boundaries is better.
Yeah. Like, so I'm going to give an example. Like, hey, I lied to protect you from harm. Not good. Still not good. Right.
Well, what harm did you think? I mean, what harm did you tell yourself was going to become me? That my feelings were going to be hurt. That people would know that I would know people really thought of me.
Yeah.
That I would feel sad. Now, if you're a parent and you better pick up your child from school, and you see a bunch of kids making fun of your child, but your child doesn't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you say to your kid, "Hey, what were those kids making fun of you?" You mean does disclosing that to your child really in the interest of honesty, right?
I guess the question is who's really getting hurt?
Who's really getting hurt, and whose interest are you serving, right? I think that some people withhold it to protect themselves, or some people share it to feel bravura, right? I'm going to crush you, kind of thing. I don't think withholding information from somebody in the service of not crushing their spirit is dishonesty.
No, you don't. Okay, that's big.
Now,
one could argue.
If I'm preventing you from growing, if I'm preventing you from evolving, if I'm preventing you from maturing, then it's cruel. And so I have to ask myself, what's the real reason I'm choosing not to tell you? And if I really have examined it and no good can come from this information other than you feeling bad or sad or hurt, then there's nothing for me to share.
Right. At least one should be thoughtful enough to understand that.
Right.
Okay.
Easy. Very nuanced, not easy, but.
Yeah, no, not easy. But there's a lot here at least, I was paying attention, and this is all still incredibly helpful. So, all right, once you've been proven untrustworthy, it essentially it's supposed to harm your ability to be influential, right? You should be undermined, right? People can no longer believe it. Intellectually, that seems accurate to me. However, I certainly in today's environment, I've seen politicians, I've seen executives, I've seen media people be untrustworthy consistently without really the commensurate penalty of their credibility. Can you tell me what is happening? Because it makes it seem as though the cost of dishonesty is diminishing over time.
So let's unpack it. So first of all, let's talk about the political arena, right? Because I think that's a very specific context. We, for some reason, are mindlessly drawn to confident leaders more so than we are to competence. A leader saying, "I don't know," in many settings is more credible. But for some reason in the political arena, we don't want leaders who don't sound like they know. So pretending like you know something you don't is the norm in politics. If you actually ask people, Steve, how many of you trust your politicians, the scores would be very low, right? I think we've just come to accept such a low bar in terms of, well, of course they all lie. That's what politics means. And look at the job. All the job is really about campaigning for fun to get reelected. There's not actually any real work to do. They don't have time to do it because they're always campaigning. So my question is, why have we come to accept that as the norm? So that context is very particular to a certain type of branded deceit that we've just all colluded together to assume that's as high as the bar gets. Now, take it out of that context, and in organizations or in our community life, I actually think the consequences these days are much higher for lying. I think people are almost ruthlessly unforgiving if you've been caught, even if you apologize today. I think our experience of dishonesty has grown so strong that our experience of honesty has gone into a free fall, that our yardsticks have almost become too high. And so when somebody in our immediate circle that we actually know, a boss, a peer, a colleague, direct report, a neighbor, has been discovered to be untruthful, we're almost reflexively shut them a door. Like there's no recovery from that anymore, which I think is also, excessively mindless tolerance of politicians is not good, but completely ruthless, unforgiving nature of people in our life is also not helpful, right? Neither of those get us to a sound, coherent, healthy, vibrant community, because we're all going to fuck up, pardon my French. So the question is not, oh my gosh, somebody was cruel to you, or oh my gosh, somebody lied to you. The question is, who will you be in that moment? And the harder question I would ask you is, who would you want them to be when you're caught?
Yes. So, all right. So if I'm paraphrasing that answer, the diminishing cost of dishonesty is asymmetrical.
Very.
In some places, it seems like it is in fact going down. In other places, it is not going down, and it's still very, very high. So trudge forth at your own peril.
I think in your immediate life, it's almost too high. Not that that's an excuse, but we've got to step back and ask ourselves, how are we going to allow us? The more grace we show each other, the more less likely we'll lie, right? But we're also busy hiding. We're also busy putting on these personas and images of ourselves to keep up an illusion of a lack of humanity. That, of course, at some point, our humanity is going to leak out.
Yeah. So if you can, learn to give a little quarter. Okay. So look, this is one that you were good about setting the table for a lot of these questions. And one of these ones that you were talking about before is silence, right? Silence on an issue not equaling honesty versus radical candor on an issue. So let's dig into that a little bit more.
I think the question you have to ask yourself is, who is your silence serving? Right? Is it you? If it's fear of retaliation or retribution, or of being mocked or being dismissed or disregarded, then your silence is not justified. The reality is, the flip side is being a blunt instrument, right? Or being, a freight train with your truth. I think today in our world, we have sadly conflated speaking your truth with speaking the truth. And so people today have learned that on the other extreme of silence is, if I just adopt a posture of an angry, loud middle finger in my tone and my voice, and I go on social media and rant, that's cool. That's allowed. That's not radical. That isn't even radical candor. It's barely honesty. And we actually have interesting neuroscience data that shows how you're almost prone to more anxiety and stress by doing that, right? It's like if somebody's poking you really hard in the chest and you go to them and say to them, hey, look, that really hurts. I would appreciate it if you stopped. You're more likely to get the outcome that you want. If you go in the streets and yell out in the streets, people who poke suck, and everybody yells out the windows, yeah, pokers are idiots. Well, which is what we do on social media, right? You're going to keep getting poked. So you have to ask yourself, in whose interest is your bluntness? In whose interest is your truth? Because if it's only about blurting and declaring and being heard as an angry rant, nothing will change. It may make you feel good, cathartic for the moment, but it's no more honest than your silence.
So there's a calibration involved, is what you're saying, that ultimately makes it honesty. On either side of that continuum, it's not necessarily honesty.
Absolutely. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is it you want the outcome to be, and whose need are you serving? Do you want to be right, or do you want to have change?
So what about being honest about a thing and also being wrong? So here's an example, right? Someone believes very strongly that climate change isn't real, right? As a consequence, they act in an earnest way to protect the jobs of those they love that happen to work in the coal industry. What do you make of that?
If they really believe in their data, their research, their version of science tells them that, it's not dishonesty. It might be ignorance, but it's not dishonesty.
Okay. So honesty does not depend on correctness. I think that's what you're saying.
No, because if someone comes in this room and tells me Steve Berg's building's on fire, and I believe it, and I call you and say, Steve, your building's on fire, I'm not lying to you because I believe it to be true. If I knew it to be false, but I tell you anyway, that's lying.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes the distinction between lying and dishonesty is a distinction without a difference. But the reality is, it's what did you know to be true at the time you did or said what you did? Now, on polarizing issues like climate change or political issues or immigration, pick any of the big ones, right? I think we all have a moral imperative to not be intellectually honest, to not be intellectually lazy, right? So if your echo chamber has only reinforced the points of view you know, this goes to the justice portion of the definition. If you've only surrounded yourself with people who think like you and you've not welcomed differing points of view, so if you're a climate change dissenter, you just don't believe it's true, who have you engaged, and not have be the radicals, but who scientifically, credibly have you engaged to read the facts of the dueling facts? What have you done to educate yourself on the opposing point of view? Not to change your mind, but to show that you can respect and appreciate why they think that way. Because they think you're as out to lunch as you think they are, right? That's never going to change anything. So I think we all owe it to our own convictions to check out and learn about the convictions of others that we don't agree with.
Right. So could I then go as far as to say critical thinking is important to the honesty process, right? That you can't necessarily go around calling yourself honest if you haven't engaged in real critical thinking.
And what I would call, Steve, intellectual honesty.
Yeah, intellectual honesty.
And testing your own assumptions, validating your own convictions. If you're someone who just rants or pounds the table or is so rigid and so wed to your own points of view, what you're signaling to others, so forget about the moral imperative here, just know that what you've told other people is that you're not open to having your mind changed, which means at some point when you need to have your mind changed, someone's not going to try. And if they see you headed off that cliff under the convictions of your own beliefs, why would you have told them, you've trained them up until that point to not try and stop you. So be very careful. I tell my executive clients all the time, the more certain you are of something, the more I'm going to test you. And the more certain you feel about something, the more you ought to ask for dueling fact bases. The more you should ask for dissenting views. The more you should have people come in and say, tell me why I'm full of crap.
Right. Yes. If belief is your justification, then you're not working hard enough.
Well, even if it's facts, right? I had one client who's an amazing executive, CEO of a very big Fortune 100 company. And he would intentionally ask for his senior team when they were going to be making a very complicated decision of consequence. He would ask for the dueling fact basis to come in the room, right? So because he know, otherwise if he didn't, they're going to debate themselves in the hallway. And so he would simply invite them into the room and say, okay, you give me your facts, you give me your facts that refute his facts. And and almost always the outcome was a much higher quality decision everybody could align around. There's no problem in the world for which only two options exist to solve. So if anytime any debate you've gotten down to is two pitted points of view, you've already lost. And the most quality answer is you've already passed it. Because now it's no longer about solving a problem, it's about proving each other wrong.
Right. We in our particular group, again, we do often make sure that that is the case, because, you know, if you get to be a good arguer, right, then it gets to be about, hey, I'm a good arguer, I win arguments.
Right. Not helpful.
Not what is the best possible outcome here. Okay, so I want to ask, I'm going to get one more thing, and then we'll wind it down here. And that has to do with honesty being purely altruistic, right? Because can we be okay knowing that part of the reason that we seek to be honest is because there's value to be captured from being honest?
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
I don't think self-interest is in and of itself bad. Obsessive self-interest at the expense of others is a problem, and over time is going to erode your trustworthiness. But caring about your agenda, Steve, doesn't mean I don't care about mine.
Right.
So I think sometimes we fool ourselves and think I'm more humble and I'm more gracious if I suppress my own interests or my own desires. That's self-deceit. I would much rather have you own your desires and put them on the table. This is what I want from this conversation. This is what I want from this relationship. I'd rather have you, I can say no. But if you're trying to protect me from your desires or protect me from your aspirations, first of all, then the relationship isn't honest. And second of all, you're not being honest.
Right. Well, but I mean, so there's that, and that's certainly helpful. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think a lot of people would, if they really had to, you know, in a monk-like way, disassociate themselves from their feelings and say, look, the reason that I'm doing this is purely altruistic. That would be nearly impossible as well.
Nobody would believe you. I mean, who would believe you? So are there moments or things where we all choose to make a sacrifice and do something purely for the service of somebody else? Of course there are. There should be. But is that everything you do? No, nobody's going to believe that. And so, you know, when you're selling to somebody, when you're trying to get somebody to sign a new contract or hire you as your consulting firm, you know, people, they know you want the business. Trying to deny that it's all about them. Now, there's an order of battle, right? So whenever I'm selling new work, my theory is always help first, sell later, right? But is that purely altruistic? No. I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. So I'm going to give you a taste of what it's going to be like to work with me by helping you right now. Because if that's not how you take your help, we know we don't have a match. But if you feel at the end of our conversation after meeting me, wow, that was really helpful, I'm like, good, let's keep talking. Eventually, I'm going to put a paper in front of you that says, here's a number. I'm going to shut the meter. But I'm doing that in the interest of helping you and getting a sale. And you know that. And so I think people who try to feign the appearance of generosity or kindness when there's more to the story than that, that's just dishonesty. It's deceit.
Okay, so look, that was the last prepared question. Let me give you a little op-ed time here. Something about the topic that you'd like to discuss that I didn't really address?
You know, the thing I want people to know, and I hope people will buy the book and read it and celebrate it and enjoy it and buy a copy for their boss for Christmas.
It's called To Be Honest.
To Be Honest, Lead with the Power of Truth, Justice, and Purpose. Listen, you don't have to look around too far to see how bad we're doing in this field, right? I mean, the world is starved for doing better, and we can all do better, right? You can start tomorrow and live a greater life of integrity. And, you know, the great news is, you know, if you're worried that this is somehow going to sacrifice performance or sacrifice something that you want, the whole first chapter will give you all the data. Those companies, those individuals who are more honest, far outperform, outlive, out enjoy, compete their dishonest counterparts. On any metric you want to find, we search for them all. Health, wellness, profitability, customer loyalty, brand loyalty, pick it. And the more honest, purpose-driven people, brands, products, companies did far better. So do you want to be the best version of yourself? Because the best version of yourself, the most gratifying version of yourself, is the most honest one. And so do it for that reason.
Pretty great point. All right. So someone who's listened to this now and says, oh man, I got to work with Ron. Where do they go?
Come to visit us at our website, Navalent, Navalent.com. You'll find all kinds of white papers and videos and cool ebooks for your startup, for your entrepreneur, for you want to be a better leader. If you want to learn more about the book and the research, we have a TV series called Moments of Truth. You can come to tobehonest.net and you get to meet all the heroes backstage, right? So Hubert Joly and Rob Bilott from Dark Waters and Tiffany Jana and Bernard Banks. So there's 15 episodes and you get to see the interviews I did when I interviewed them for the book. And you get to also meet a bunch of other people because I have Khalil Smith from the Neuro Leadership Institute and Jared Chappell also do interviews. So you get a 30-minute episode of really rich conversations with some amazing people who will inspire you. So check that all out at tobehonest.net. Also, if you want to fill out the assessment, how honest is my team? And find out, are you getting the real scoop or not? tobehonest.net/assessment. You can download that assessment and find out tonight.
All right. So I guess that means this is the end. Thank you very much. Look, this is a challenging topic. There's no doubt about it. I think you do a really good job of kind of cutting through. I also think that, this is a topic that, hopefully after listening to this, some people will do some soul searching.
That's my hope, Steve. And I'm grateful that you're covering the whole broader issue of trust in your podcast because we have to get better at it. We have to get better at trustworthiness. I have actually, if you want to put a link in your show notes, I did the HBR article on the book called Build Your Reputation as a Trustworthy Leader, all based on the research. It went hundreds of thousands worth viral because I think people are hungry. We all want to do better, but no one's teaching us how. So hopefully people will do that soul searching you mentioned.
We will add that to the show notes. Sir, I appreciate your thoughts and guidance. Thank you.
Steve, a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
This has been Intangibles. You can find this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, and many other podcast platforms. You can also find it at its home on the web, which is www.intangiblespodcast.com. I'm Steve BERG. Thank you. Keep an eye out for the next episode.